So once again, Patrick Halstead here at Qdabra Software. I want to welcome everyone to this week's webinar. Once again, we are talking about surveys. In fact, this week it gets really interesting. We're actually taking our surveys that we've been working on in email, and we're moving them to SharePoint. And there's a number of benefits to SharePoint when you have your surveys there, and we'll talk about those. First of all, before we get started, if you can hear me, that's great. If you can't hear me, you can't, obviously, you want to configure your audio, and there is a way to do that. We have the settings in the email that you got, so go ahead and try to do that. If you can't hear me, obviously you don't know what I'm saying now, but we will be posting these recordings on YouTube later today. These webinars, we provide them weekly. We do something different every week. We want to help you stay ahead of the curve on SharePoint. New techniques, new ideas. Nothing is recorded. In other words, we're not pre-recording these. We're doing it live, so sometimes we have issues. Appreciate your patience. And if you give us your contact information, we will send you the package of goodies at the end. Okay, so with survey patterns, we've gone through part 1, 2, and 3, and this week we're really doing part 4. I'll talk more about this in a second. Next week we'll extend it even further into reporting on lists in SharePoint, and then finally, the final week, we'll talk about doing database reporting. So just to recap, best practices for surveys, there's 3 best practices I want to drive home here. One is make sure you have a data-driven design. We're going to see one of the benefits of a data-driven design today when I show you the forms with SharePoint. The benefit is that the forms, the surveys I created for today's class, today's webinar, can be completely used in last week's survey for email. So if you have a split scenario where you want to send out some surveys in email, you don't want other people to fill it out in the browser on SharePoint, then you can definitely do that. Just save your XML and just reuse it, import it into your InfoPath form, your survey, and it will work just fine. So I think we still have audio, right, Marcy? Just want to check. we're still good at the recording.
Yes, sounds good.
Thanks. Next best practice, obviously, unique question IDs. When you're creating questions, we'll see this again today. You want to make sure that your form gives each question a unique ID, and that's useful when you scale out your surveys. Like today, we'll show you 2 surveys and a platform for editing, allowing multiple people to edit those survey questions using the lists. And they can't do that unless the questions are ID'd uniquely. Otherwise, the questions will collide with one another, and we don't know which questions to use in which surveys. Also, it's important when you're doing reporting afterwards to have unique questions, and that's easy to do in InfoPath, and I'll show you that again today. Last best practice is scale out. Now, today we're going to talk about this multiple senders, so multiple people who can fill out the survey. Actually, multiple people who are creating the survey. We'll talk about that today, and then next week, actually the week after next, we'll talk about how we can move to thousands and thousands of responses. You know, SharePoint's great for collecting lots of data, and each answer will be submitted to SharePoint next week. We'll create a separate list for the answers. Each question will have a separate answer. Each survey will have a list of answers, actually a set of answers. So let's say you have 20 questions in your survey. People will submit those answers in to a SharePoint list. Well, if you've got lots of surveys and lots of people filling them out, you can quickly see the list growing to 50 or 100,000 different items. And SharePoint, doesn't scale out pretty much beyond about 100,000 items. And you can do it. There's some tricks, but in general, you're going to want to move your data into the database at some point. For example, and there's indexing you can do on your SharePoint list to make it faster, but it's not out of the box. It's not defaulted. So there's, when you're dealing with millions of items, you're going to want a secondary repository. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. Okay, so last week what did we do? We went through and we talked about email forms and SharePoint. We had a split solution last week. Last week we created a form. We actually created 2 versions of a form. And we can go back to my talk last week and you can watch. But the first version of the form was sent in email to the audience, the target audience. And the second version of the form I installed locally. And so what happened was whenever I received a response via email, because this was an extranet survey, I would get the response, and so I would see it in my Outlook folder, and I would click a button and I would upload it to SharePoint. So I was an admin desk, and I was processing surveys. Now this scenario is really nice for people who, for organizations where you've got your audience in the field, because email is great. You can cache it, you can offline it. Works just wonderful, and if you've got InfoPath installed, they can just fill out the forms in the field. And then they can submit them, and they're an email, right, until they get connected, and then the email gets sent to the manager or the person who's sending out the surveys, and then they just review them, upload them to SharePoint, they can do whatever they want with them. So that's great, but today we're going to talk about how to take it a step further in scenarios where you have people who are connected to the web. So this scenario this week, we're going to do multiple survey editors. We're going to do it in the browser. You don't have to have InfoPath installed. We're going to reduce the complexity of the configuration. Last week we had a special configuration because we had 2 forms using the same data. We had to make sure the names were the same. We also had to do some configuration in email to make sure that the email folder was set up correctly and everything. We don't have to do that in today's solution. And best of all, today's solution, we are using this out-of-box default security setting, which is domain security. So it's not restricted, which means we can do a bunch of other cool stuff, which you'll see. And that's it for the demo. I'm going to switch to the demo now and just show you this stuff. And we've got here, last week we had, recall 2 variants of the survey. And this week we just have 1. Now, of course, keep in mind that we still have Question Editor, and then we have the Survey Filler. Question Editor is what we're using to edit our questions. I'm going to open this in the Designer and just show you this again. This is really the same as it was last week. We've made a couple modifications to connect it to a SharePoint list, and I'll go over those in a second. But I just want to show you that it looks very similar to what we had last week and the weeks before. Essentially, we have a question editor. This is allowing us to create our surveys. And then we have another form, which is the filler, which allows us to fill out the form, fill out the survey. And these are both now connected to SharePoint, and I'll show you how they are connected in a second. But I want to quickly switch to my SharePoint site and just show you how this works. Okay, so on my SharePoint site, what I've done, you can see this hopefully, is I've created a form library, and I've got my surveys published out here. I've got 2 surveys. The names aren't very interesting right now. It's just 25 and 27. I can open up a survey, and this is using the question editor. So this survey is a list of questions for an InfoPath project. So we want to do a consulting project for one of our customers. We have questions we need to ask them. And you can see here that all the questions are listed up here, and you can see that we have the ability in the question editor to change the type of the answer. We can have conditionality. So if we can scroll down here, there's a couple questions in here that I think have conditions on. You can see how I can add a condition. I guess we have one condition here. Actually, maybe not. No, there it is. So the condition is if the tab sections is equal to no, then we want to hide this or we display it. So here you can see that I have all the questions showing up in my condition, and I can pick the question I want to condition the hide show of this field on. Okay, so that's the editor. Let me just show you what this looks like in the filler, and I'm just going to switch to my filler, if I can find it. go back there in a second. Should have had this prepared before I actually did the demo here. So let's just click on this. We're going to fill out a new form. And once again, this is going to be in the browser. We have to select the survey first. You can see there's two surveys that we have. It's 25 and 27. Selecting the survey then pulls in the questions automatically from the SharePoint site and displays them. Now there are 20 or so questions in this first survey, so it takes a second or two to load. And then you can see the questions here. Now, I don't remember exactly which one it was, but you can see that if I click yes for one of these, it's going to display the sub-questions underneath it. And you can see we have different question types. Let's see if I can find that section here with views. And underneath here we've got, well, I think I'm in the wrong location here, but we've got body. And underneath body we've got, let's see here if I can find it, we got a conditional, I think, whether it was tabbed or not. And you can see here that I don't see that if it's not tabbed, no, then well, let's just see what happens. It doesn't display anything. If it's a yes, will it display the child? Yes, it does. So that's how the conditionality works, is you can see that it only displays the questions based on the answer. So we can have multiple layers of questions. We talked about that in day one, day two, or the part one, part two of the week webinars. We also have multiple levels here. We have conditionality. We have different answer types. We've gone through that all before. So that's not really the purpose of today's demo. The more interesting thing today is the fact that we have these questions saved out in a list. So from our question editor form, what we're doing is we're connecting it to two different SharePoint lists. The first list, you can see here, is we've got a lot of lists here. I've got list one, which is my surveys, the name of the survey and the ID. And list two is the list of all the questions in that survey. So the question editor itself, and this is all the questions in all the surveys. So we have some sample test data at the top. If I page ahead here, you'll see that the questions for 25 are all listed here. And that's going to be useful because we can, of course, create a simple InfoPath form on top of the list here by clicking on List and Customize that edits the individual questions. Or what we can do is we can go back to the question editor and we can collectively edit them. So let's do this one more time here. I'm going to show you, I'm going to actually create a new view here. Okay, so once again, we have here our question surveys, two surveys. And if we go into survey 2, take a look at this. This is a slightly shorter survey. And it's got 6 different questions, okay? Now these survey questions are getting saved out to that list. So let me show you how that works. I've got here at the very bottom, I've got a question on documentation. Does the customer need documentation? We're going to add a question here, and that question is going to be, actually, what I want to do is add a sub-question. Having difficulty here, bear with me one moment. Well, let's just change one here. So I should know how to add a question, obviously, but there's going to be something in here that'll add a sub question or a sub to this, and that's fine. Do you want the ability to update, let's see, document, novice document needed. So let's say we have some people that haven't used InfoPath before. We'll just ask whether or not they need a novice document. So we're going to save this out just as the same form. And and close this. Now, if I open it up again, it's going to obviously have that question here at the bottom. Verify that it got saved correctly. There it is. But more importantly, if we go to the list and switch to our list now, which is list 2, you'll see here at the very end, we've got quite a few questions now, but if we page through these, we'll show you how we've actually saved the question here. There's documentation, and we have the questions, you can see obviously there, but it's not, we're just storing the new question. We don't know this yet, but let's say, obviously we got to find it. All the questions are saved out here, and if we change them and we reopen the question editor, it will change them. So let's just do that real quick. I'm going to go into the documentation one and just edit this. Just say, I'll just put it in caps for the purpose of the demo, so you can see that it actually changed. And now if we go back to our question editor form and close it and reopen it, any luck, it has pulled in the new value. So the point here is that we have actually set up this InfoPath form, this question editor form, to save the values to the SharePoint list and to refresh the values in the form when the list changes. Now this gives you a lot of power because it allows you to different scenarios. You can edit things individually, you can edit things collectively, and that's for the data for the survey. With the survey itself, it's pulling in the questions from the list. Let's take a look at the forms real quick. So I opened the forms at the very beginning. Here's the question editor form. Now, in order to do this on submit or save, and that's the problem, is I didn't use the submit button. That's why it didn't actually create it. Let's add that question. Well, we got the survey here, so I need to submit it this time and not save it. And this should actually get that novice question in. I should probably disable submit. That's a bad practice to leave it there. Okay, so once we've saved it, now let's go back to our list and let's just refresh this and see if we have the novice question here at the end. And there it is. So once again, we're going both directions. So we're saving questions from our question editor. We can also edit them in the list, and it round trips just fine. How do we do this? Once again, in the question editor here, we've got a submit button with rules on it, obviously. When we submit it to the SharePoint site, we're actually submitting it to the list first. And we're just running a command, and that command is submit to SharePoint. Now, if you're telling me, look, Patrick, I've never seen that command ever, that's fine. It's fair. We have a plugin that we provide, common library of functionality, to do these advanced operations like submit to SharePoint list, and that plugin is called Qrules, and you can see here that once we plug it in, once we inject it into our form, we have a data source called Qrules, and there's a field on there called command, and all we do is access the functionality. There's over 100 different things you can do with it. Is we just set that command. The sample today is injected with a free trial of that, so you can test that out. Otherwise, we'd have to write code, and of course, we don't want to write code. We just want to reuse the same common library for all of our forms. And this is really easy to add this. We have other tutorials and blogs on how to submit to SharePoint lists using Qrules. So that's what this is doing. On submit, it's just submitting to the question list, and then it's submitting the form to the library. Let's take a look quickly at the actual survey form. So when we fill this out, in fact, let's go and fill it out again because we've added a question. So we're going to go to the survey form here, close this out and reopen it. I want to edit, I want to actually, okay, so we're going to open up a new survey, and we're going to select that architecture survey. And of course, we've got that documentation. We've got the all cap documentation item in there. And we've got the sub-question for novice document needed, which I think we've not specified the type, so we've got a bug there. And we can fix that, of course. Go back into the survey form, and we can fix the type of it so that it's actually, we're recording something. Anyway, and I can do that real quick. Let's just do that real quick, just to show you that this is actually all working. Question editor. So we've got, I need to refresh this. Open up my survey, 27. I could go into the list as well, but it's just easier here to just go in here and just say I want to make this a yes/no option. Now remember, like before, we need to make sure we click on the submit button. That's something I need to improve with the form. I need to get the save submit out, the save as out, so it doesn't confuse me. So once we've saved it, we'll open up the survey one more time, and you'll see there's the survey. We're just going to close this partial version and just open up a new one again. Select the architecture survey, pulls in the questions from the list, and now if we drill down on that documentation item, we have a yes/no for the novice document. Now you could change the layout of this a little bit. Everything's aligned to the same column for the answer, and that's a little bit confusing here. But so there's some improvements you could make, but this is generally get the idea here. So that looks a lot better. Okay, so let's take a look at that survey real quick. How did we do that? So this is the question editor form, I believe, and what we wanted, actually, this is the survey form. So what we're doing here is we have a very data-driven survey. So you can see here that you can have a number of different answer types: text, answer type, the yes checkbox, the yes/no radio button, and the date. We could add answer types in there. Notice they're all bound to the same answer here in the data source. And we're just hiding these and showing these depending on what the type is. And this allows our form to be data-driven. The data type or the answer just is switched in or out depending on what the answer type is. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And we talked about that in a previous webinar. But what we're doing here is when we open the form, we've got a rule. So I can find it here. So form load doesn't do anything. It's like, well, what's it doing? Well, once again, we're using Q rules, and we have a rule here in Q rules, so that when we're finished loading, let's take a look at the rules on this. It's not there either. So where is it here? When we open the form, there is a rule that's going out there, and if we don't know where it is, what's the trick? Well, it's easy. You just go into your data view, and there's a button on here to click on Rule Inspector, and you can see all the rules in the form. So you can see here that this form here is getting the survey questions, and that's happening. When's that happening here? There's got to be an on load here, probably right in front of my face, and I can't see it here. But the form is actually getting the questions on load, and it's inserting them, and these are the rules that it's using to do that. And obviously, I've got male pattern blindness here, but anyway, you saw it working, so it's obviously in there somewhere. Now I'll take a look at it again. But we're pretty much at the end of our quick webinar. I want to switch back to the slides here real quick and go over the value prop. So what did I do today? We showed you the question editor map to multiple lists, surveys and questions. We're submitting and refreshing, so we're actually going both ways with the SharePoint list. And we configured our filler to pull the lists, pull from those lists using filtering. And we have it all enabled in the browser, so they don't need InfoPath. Now the key takeaways for today are that it is useful sometimes to do this mapping to lists. Why? Well, people can individually edit questions via the list. They can collectively edit them using the question editor form. The mapping is, of course, you need Q rules or something like it to do the mapping, but we've been providing this to the community for a long time now, and it is a very good deal. Of course, Marcy's got discounts if you need them, and we have a lot of happy customers of this plugin. The plugin can be used in all your forms. The key takeaway here is mapping your forms to SharePoint lists gives you added flexibility when you're editing. The second takeaway is when you're displaying the forms in the browser, the InfoPath form is going to reduce your fill-out cost because people don't have to install Office. Obviously, the UI for an InfoPath form is more powerful than a SharePoint list form. A SharePoint list form can't do parent-child edits, but an InfoPath form can, and the updates are seamless. In other words, it doesn't have to refresh the whole page. You can refresh only one section. That's important. And we've talked about that in previous webinars where we did parent-child demos. And finally, the data-driven design means that the survey is backward compatible. So I can take that survey I created and I can export it to, so I can go in here and I can just close this out, go back to my surveys. Let's see if I can find them here. And I can just basically push this survey down to my, just offload a copy. And I'm just going to save it in my folder for a day. I'm just going to call it 27B so you know I'm not doing any shenanigans. And here's what I'm going to send you today. But first let me show you using the filler form from last week. If I go ahead and open this filler form up, sorry about that. When you open up InfoPath, you can't have other InfoPath instances open. Okay, so I think that this is what I want to show you. Got the filler form here. This is the private one. Anyway, let me just show you this real quick here. So you go into data connections, and it's an email form, so the questions are basically embedded in the form for each survey, right? Because you're going to send it out one at a time. This is a restricted form, so we have to just go in here, and we just basically, this is the wrong one. Let's take a look at this one here. Data connections, questions. There it is. That's our XML. Just going to modify this to point it at that one we just saved. Don't change the name because otherwise you have to fix up all the bindings. And now if we preview this, you'll see that we have that question at the bottom. So the survey data works just fine with the email forms we did in the previous weeks. And that's a key takeaway. That basically is because the form is data-driven and we don't have any tightly coupled schema. So that's pretty much it. There are some questions. Obviously, we've had questions in the past here for last week, questions that came in after the webinar. Can you control who filled out the survey? Yes, you can do that. You can target an audience. You can actually use workflows to change the permissions on a form when it's saved to prevent them from editing it after they've submitted it the first time. And that's something we do training on. Any other questions from the rest of you? I'm going to go through these questions, but this is a good time now. If you've got questions, throw them into the chat session. I have not looked at chat, so I'm going to open that up here and see if there are any questions. And this is your opportunity to ask any questions whatsoever. While I'm waiting for your question here, I'm just going to type in questions. Other questions from last week, we had a participant who watched the video online. Shout out to our Excel MVP friend Ingeborg in New Zealand. She had these good questions for me in email. How are you reporting on the results for your surveys? Well, we'll see that next week. We're going to show you how to do reporting on lists out of box. And in terms of the who can see the results, well, because we don't have any permissions set up, no workflow set up to control the editability of the documents, anybody who has access to the form library can see them at this point. Users can go back and edit their survey right now. If they have access, they can just go in there and open them up. And for this fifth question here, can users have a half-finished survey and return at a later time to complete it? Yes. In fact, what you're going to want to do here is distinguish between a save and a submit. So we would want to add a button to the form, not using the typical save functionality, but actually add a button. The button will set a status equal to saved or pending, and then we'll use that information in our view to prevent the saved items from being reported on with the submitted items. So that'll allow people to kind of report on the intermediate stuff as well as the stuff that's been completed. So any other questions for me? This is I've gone a little bit over in time, but I've got a few minutes here if you've got questions. I don't see any questions. It'd be great if we had at least one question. Marcy, do you have a question?
I don't have any questions, sorry.
Glad to hear that I'm still talking to people, though. And I think you can just, I guess, finish up the recording. That would be good.
Okay.
But if we do have questions from the audience, and I know that looks like there's one person that didn't quite get audio configured there, but he'll be able to see the recording on YouTube. And hopefully it wasn't completely esoteric today. If you want to get the packet of information, don't forget to go to our Contact Us page, add your email in here, and let us know how you like the webinar today, and we'll send you the goodies. And next week we are doing part 5 of the surveys, and